morning, everyone. Today's scripture reading is taken from Psalms 90, verses 1 to 17. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever had formed the earth and the world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You return man to dust and say, "Return, O children of man. For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. You sweep them away as with a flood. They are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. For we are brought to an end by your anger. By your wrath we are dismayed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. For all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Who considers the power of your anger, and your wrath according to the fear of you? So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. Return, O Lord, how long? Have pity on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands.
So my friends, my new friends who have met, and my friends here at Redeemer, we have an everlasting God who has an everlasting love for us. If you take anything from today, know that. Listen to the scripture, dwell on it, let God speak to your heart. But like any preacher, I came up with 3 points that perhaps you could take away, following Pastor Carl's footsteps a little bit. So, the first 2 points. Now, if you are not a Christian, or if you're a Christian and perhaps on not your best days, not your best moments, I want to suggest that we as humans desperately crave control. And the second point is also we desperately crave mortality. And that might be really hard to hear, but I want to propose to you this is true. But ultimately, I want us to all look to the third point, whether you're a skeptic, not a Christian, and we need to cling and crave the cross of Jesus where life is found. So let's go to our first point, craving control. What can we learn from Psalm 90? Well, before we examine the text more, let me tell you just some personal stories from my own life. So in the last 2 months, my family was surprised to find out that my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. She has 8-centimeter tumor in her lung. And it was surprising because she's someone who did a nursing background. She's someone who ate well, cooked well, taught her children how to cook well, eat well. I did a kinesiology background because I was inspired by my mom. She took regular canoe trips to the Great Canadian North to escape the city. She had no history of smoking. She is someone who you wouldn't expect to have this. Yet, so we were shocked, and life is unpredictable. And so we were waiting. Does this mean chemo? Does this mean surgery? Does this mean days? The good news is chemo is out of the question. There's a surgery scheduled later in March. And so we're hoping the surgery goes well. But, the doctors told us that the type of cancer she has, thankfully it didn't spread anywhere, but 80% of patients with this cancer have no preconditions that would otherwise suggest so. So what the doctor was essentially telling us is that life is extremely unpredictable. And death and suffering comes to us all regardless of our state. The next story I kind of want to share. Again, not my extended family, but Sarah and I's family. So before I was a family pastor here, or before becoming legitimate in a week, I was a student missionary to Brock and Niagara College and University of Niagara Falls students. And one of my former students, he was getting married. It was great. He was a youth pastor in Niagara. We were excited to celebrate his wedding with him. Sarah and I went to the wedding. We had Sarah's parents watch our kids. And then we came home just for a brief pause in between the ceremony and the reception. And then Sarah's mom came to us crying and told us that the sad news that Sarah's cousin, who was about 38 years old, died in a tragic accident. And so what was supposed to be a day of great rejoicing, celebrating, quickly turned into the exact opposite. And this was someone who was 30 years old, passed away, accident, and whose 90-year-old grandparents had to mourn the loss of their grandchild before they passed away. So life is unpredictable. Death and suffering comes to us all. And so, again, I have other stories I could share within the last 5 years. I know, based off my hair, I have a few more years that you can reasonably expect I have. And I've lived with my grandmother, so I know that from living with my grandmother, it seems like every day there's a new friend of hers that passes away. And so I understand that. But I think this wisdom is important for all the generations to know, because I'm guessing that, like many of you, for the first decades of your lives in Canada, you have been blessed and have enjoyed a reasonable amount of stability from God. Though that was certainly my experience. I've had occasional blips of suffering or death in my family, and those were sad. That was tragic, like my grandparents. But it was also, if I'm being honest, expected. And so it feels a little bit different, right? Especially when they're Christian. It feels a little bit different. Or you might have occasional blips, like I shared before about a friend of mine when I was 18 who got cancer and then died when she was 18. But again, most of the decades of my life was blessed with stability. And I'm not here to preach against stability. I think that's a great blessing. But take the word from the psalm and know that our lives are mortal. Know that our lives cannot be controlled, even though we desperately want to, even though we desperately crave control. And so I'm going to share some wisdom about the irony of control from a mutual professor that Carl and I both shared. And he's spoken here before. His name is Victor Shepard. And Victor Shepard says, since there's so much we can control, there's also nothing that feels like we cannot control. Right? Especially in today's modern, rapidly advancing technological era. My grandfather, who was born in the 1930s, who passed away in his 80s, wonderful Christian man. He was a general surgeon, vascular surgeon in Niagara region. He's prayed with patients as they operate with them. He's operated on rich, poor, really sick, those who are surprisingly sick. It's hard to say healthy because how can you have a really healthy person come in for an operation? But again, from his work, from his life, he's taught our family to expect the unexpected. But he would be shocked to see how much medical technology and how much our average medical lifespan has increased. He would be floored to see how AI is advancing the ability for us to control our lives, medical technology. This is the only slide in my slideshow that I can say is authentically one that I did not do for the purpose of this conversation. This is a fully ChatGPT generated image to display the fact that I can type into my phone, generate me some content about medical technology and AI, and this is purely an AI image. Now, for someone like me, this is counterfeit. I'm immediately. But if this is hard for you, I would suspect you find someone in the congregation who can help you discern, because, friends, it's coming. And if this image teaches you anything, it's we can control anything. Anything I could ever want, I could type into my phone and I can have it. Yet the one thing we cannot control is death and how suffering comes to us all. Jesus speaks to us in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6 in verse 25 to 34. He tells his disciples and those listening to him, do not worry. For he says, if the grass of the field is clothed and it passes away, and I fearfully and wonderfully made you, how much more will he clothe you of little faith? So we can crave control, but know that our desire for security and control comes from a very secure, sovereign, holy Lord, who will actually secure us in the face of life and death. So if you are struggling to be anxious, please rest, fall back in the comforting arms of our loving God. And so Victor Shepard continues to build upon this lie that we seek control. He says this lie is what we assume until it happens. It's being death and suffering. And then we react as if something utterly alien, utterly ununderstandable has descended upon us and us alone. Why does death and suffering feel alien to us today? I want to suggest that for many of us, and not all of us, I think some of us, and it's complex, right? Death and suffering is a complex subject. I think some of us have, from our early years, navigated unpredictability and suffering early on. Yet I think many of us, myself included, would say that, as Victor Shepard says, it's this ease that some of us have come to enjoy, especially in Canada, in the West, where, yeah, sure, maybe we're mocked, maybe we're teased lightly for our faith, maybe we might lose our jobs for something that we're saying, but we haven't lost charity status. We're not actively killed for our faith yet, unlike other places. It's this ease that some of us enjoy, fostered by our influence, by our affluence. This ease is something that then we feel we have a right to. Again, coming back to my mom a little bit. So when our family learned about my mom, I think it's tempting in the light of pain to say, well, we're offended. Deeply offended by this. How unjust is this? She's not even 60 yet. This is unfair. This is someone who worked her hardest not to get something like this. So why? And I think this temptation for why we should feel this way comes from that expectation, from this ease that some of us have come to enjoy. Psalm 90 teaches us, now keep in mind this was written in biblical ancient times, where actually if you could live to 70 or 80, that's a great blessing, great privilege. Now it's a reasonable expectation, right? So this reasonable expectation that we could live to 70 or 80, if left unquestioned, becomes an unquestionable right that one should live to 70 or 80 years old. And then the ultimate tempting conclusion when something happens to us is that we are victims and unfairly offended by God. Now, for any atheist in the room, you might really rejoice because it sounds like I'm starting to build up to this, yes, blame everything on God. Well, friends, we are not victims, as hard as that is to hear. You know why? Romans 3:23 says all have fallen short of the glory of God. Romans 6:23 says the wages of sin is death. In the garden, when Adam and Eve had everything they could have ever wanted, they had God's goodness, and all they had to do was just not eat from the tree and trust in God's goodness, they chose their own knowledge, and they willingly chose death. God told Adam and Eve, if you eat of this, you will die. They willingly chose to disobey, and they chose death. So friends, we're not victims. We chose this for ourselves. As hard as that is to hear. I know sin and suffering is complex, and I know that some of us, it does feel like we're victims often to some intense suffering. I get that. Especially for some of the younger generations. I've heard some of the older generations in the room critique the younger generation, saying they've never had it so good, and they're quick to be assume a victim mentality. I understand their critiques. I do. But from 7 years working with the younger generation, seeing Christianity rapidly exploding at the Brock University campus, I'm confident there is a generation who is willing to persevere, willing to be resilient, willing to face suffering and hardships in the face of it and say, this can't touch me, because I know God is for me, not against me. Their confidence doesn't come from themselves, but from a secure relationship with God. They understand the calling from Jesus in Luke 14:27 that says, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. The youth at Redeemer, we just finished a quote-unquote discipleship series. That doesn't mean they've graduated being a disciple. We're all disciples. But 2 weeks ago we talked about John 15, where Jesus says, I'm the vine, you are the branches, remain in me and you'll bear much fruit. But he also says, you prove to me my disciples if you bear fruit. And so I'm excited for when Pastor Carl does talk about James, because yes, we believe that salvation comes from faith alone, but the fruit that we bear matters. How we carry our cross matters. If we're simply idle Christians, we're not disciples. That's a hard truth. The hard truth is that our lives are not our own. We like to think that we can control our lives, to think that we're our own. Maybe we've intentionally gone to a certain school, chose certain classes, tried to get a certain type of job, but then you, like in the midst of unpredictability, you figure out that your job might change because AI might run you out of a job and you might have to repurpose. Anyways, like life is extremely unpredictable. Our lives are not our own, as Jeremiah 10:23 says. So in the face of all this, I want to leave you with a fictional story that actually speaks of the Christian story. And there's a character that I want you to walk away with. There's two, actually. I love C.S. Lewis in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I think this book is a perfect prescription for the fact that we crave control. So first of all, there's one character in this book. His name is Eustace Scrubb. As C.S. Lewis writes, his name was Eustace Scrubb, and it's almost like he deserved it, right? He was this boy who was so jealous, and he mocked his cousins, Edmund and Lucy, for going to Narnia, having all these adventures. And he said, like, he's basically the perfect antidote of someone who craves control, craves the stability of his own home. Like, and if you've seen the movie, they kind of exaggerate him also a little bit, but it's sort of true. Like, he's the perfect antidote. Yet in Narnia, he gets transformed. He meets Aslan, who is like the Christ-like figure, and he has a change of heart. But one character who journeyed with Eustace in his change of heart, which is so important for us to know, is Reepicheep. And this is the image I want to leave with you. Reepicheep. He has courage, he has valor, he's willing to persevere, he has a peace with him. Yet, is he like the centaurs or the minotaurs? He's the smallest of all creatures. Yet he serves Aslan faithfully, not wavering in the face of death. He perfectly fits Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of shadow and death, I will fear no evil. Reepicheep has Romans 6:8 embedded in his character, which says, now if we have died with Christ, we believe that we'll also live with him. And so let me, in the face of wanting to control everything, please take Reepicheep's last words in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader to heart. Now, I'm spoiling the book for you, but they go on this adventure in the Dawn Treader. They're in Narnia, and there's a promise that every Narnian will go to Aslan's country and dwell with Aslan forever. And so the Dawn Treader manages to actually get to this, where those two worlds collide. And Reepicheep knows that his time has come. And he says to all the Narnians listening, including Eustace, my own plans are made. While I can, I sail east in the Dawn Treader. When she fails me, I paddle east on my coracle. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my forepaws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country or shot over the edge into worlds some vast cataract, I shall sink with my nose to the sunrise. His confidence, his security with God is so firm that he's willing to sink with his nose to the sunrise, knowing that God is for him and not against him, knowing that he will dwell forever with God. And that needs to be our confidence. All right, so going from craving control to craving mortality. If you just heard Psalm 90, it's all about death. And you might be thinking, Pastor Tanner, we want good news. Why are you telling us about death, mortality, especially on the Valentine's Day, Family Day long weekend? What a message you chose. If you want any of those messages, you can Google them anytime you want. I thought I'd give you something different. Craving mortality. So again, a good book that I think illustrates this is Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. Now, Neil Postman was not a Christian. He was a secular Jew. Yet he has great insight. He's a product of his time, and he writes basically to educators, to families, to marketplace leaders, to culture at large, saying, the television will change everything. And I'm exaggerating and paraphrasing his thesis, but he basically says, once the television comes and becomes the main staple in every North American home, education will be changed, the family life will be changed, we'll be further slaves to consumerism than we ever have been. The TV will literally become a sedative, sort of like how in Huxley's Brave New World, if you've read the book, you kind of know what I'm talking about. There's the sedative that keeps everyone temporarily happy, but not truly happy. This is what he's writing about. He's a pure genius, because how far have we come from our TVs, correct? Again, someone who would probably be rolling in his grave. We now have like a smartphone With Instagram, Facebook, we have a computer and a streaming device in our pockets. We have watches. Mine doesn't tell me how fast my heart rate is going, but basically a computer on my wrist. How far have we come? And so I'm setting up a little bit of an irony here, but the first part of our irony for mortality is rather than facing life's greatest challenges despite the rewards head on, like maybe a difficult conversation with your spouse at marriage, maybe you're frustrated with someone at work, maybe you're frustrated with someone at church, maybe you're like all these difficult conversations or difficult things you know you have to persevere in, but you choose not to. TV, the smartphone, doom scrolling on Facebook or Instagram is the easiest way out. It's a perfect sedative to literally amuse yourselves to death while keeping yourself completely idle from doing any good work. So that's one part of the irony. Here's the second part, and you can go to the next slide. And I'm not here necessarily I'm just illustrating a culture thing at large, okay? So while we amuse ourselves to death, in the last 100 years, if you take the horror fiction genre as a whole, which again, you can see in books, and then you can see that ramp up in the blockbuster movie franchises. You can see it on any streaming platform, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, that you might have. This genre sells. Why does it sell? Why is it so popular? I want to propose the irony is while we avoid death and suffering and hard conversations, we crave mortality. We crave it like no other. And this is why, and again, I'm not necessarily preaching this to say trick or treat or not trick or treat, right? But this is why Halloween is quickly becoming one of the most popular Canadian holidays. It's a holiday which acknowledges the fact that while we avoid hardships and perseverance, we crave mortality and violence always. And so the irony is that we're distracted, yet craving mortality and violence. And rather than getting helpful reminders of our mortality from God's word, we turn to other sources. And so at this point, some of you might be thinking, okay, this is maybe a little bit of an innocent irony. I'm going to hit you really hard now with how this irony becomes very sinful. Do you know that, you go to the Gospel Coalition slide, TGC, now all pornography is terrible, but do you know that especially violent pornography is on the rise? Do you know that in marriages, especially among young dating relationships, violence in relationships is also on the rise? It's the direct correlation where rather than embracing hard, difficult conversations, taking the risk in dating, like learning how to have those difficult things, it is easier to be violent and to seek violence online, participate in sin, yet to have a healthy yet risky relationship. And so this illustrates the truth. We ultimately amuse ourselves to death, and we become further slaves to sin. And the bigger truth is that God's wrath comes to us because of our sin. Our days are numbered. We are ultimately mortal. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. Let's go to the next slide where it's how we have sinned. Again, I'm just going to rush through some of these, but not illustrate them. So again, amusing ourselves to death, being idle of good works. This is not like a modern phenomenon. If you just read the Bible, the Apostle Paul receives news from a church in Thessalonica saying there are busybodies, anxious people, but who are actually not working. That's sort of like a parallel to today, where we are busybodies, where we amuse ourselves to death, yet idle to good work. So this is not new. This is part of the human condition which Paul had to address. Again, we crave mortality and death at the expense of others. We watch sin from a distance, but victimize any discipleships or hardships to our cozy Canadian lives. And a little bit more on this one. Numbers 14 is written there just to illustrate how we are exactly like the Israelites. And not necessarily the Israelites who were redeemed from Egypt, but the grumbling Israelites and the Israelites who thought they were victims in the wilderness. Now, backstory. There's this man named Abraham, Father Abraham. God made him a promise saying, I'll make your descendants as numerous as the stars. They'll be enslaved in a nation for a while, but in a few hundred years, I'll redeem them, and they will go to this physical promised land, correct? So all that is true. God is sovereign. He's faithful to his promise. His word is true. But then when God sends Moses and Aaron, demonstrates his power by sending 10 horrendous plagues, by providing for the Israelites in the wilderness on the way to the promised land. He gives them meat, quail. He gives them what they want. He gives them water. He rains down manna from heaven. He gives them everything they want. But you know what number 14 really clearly says? The Israelites complained. They said, "This God brought us out into the wilderness so that he may slay us and so we may die here. It would have been better if we were slaves in Egypt because we had food there." And I can be a little bit harsh with them, but I'm being harsh with them because they are us. Right? In the midst of suffering and hardship, we can only endure so much. It is easy to blame God despite him miraculously being patient, merciful, and providing for us always. So ultimately, we have sinned, and we have sinned against an infinitely holy God, and we're infinitely guilty of an eternal punishment. And so this is, for those of you who are wanting the good part of the sermon, we're getting there, okay? But I want you to sit in this, okay? But here's the hope within all this irony, in that in our desperate attempts to crave control and that we crave mortality, it seems like all hope is lost, but we have a hope within this irony. There is nowhere too dark where God cannot reach us. Psalm 139 says, "Where can I go from your spirit?" The psalmist acknowledges that he tried to run away from God to the ends of the earth, even into the darkest places. And the psalmist writes, "Even in the darkness, it was as light." There is nowhere too dark where God cannot reach you. He loves you. He has an everlasting love for you. As Carl preached last week, our God is the hound of heaven. He will reach us no matter how dark we get. Yet, as we read in the first John, we shouldn't have fellowship with the darkness, right? God meets us in the darkness so that we may be brought out, so that we may trust in him. Luke 24, 5-6. This is the woman, so woman being Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary Magdalene, Joanna. Jesus has died. It seems like everyone is mourning and grieving, and they do their customary visiting the tomb, treating to the body. Yet an angel greets them and says, "Why are you looking for the living amongst the dead?" I think many of us want a living, everlasting God of everlasting love, but are looking for that amongst the dead things. Come out. Come out from that. Luke 15, this is the story of the prodigal sons. Jesus tells a story to illustrate what the kingdom of God is like. Jesus says, God is like the father who has two sons. One son wanted his father dead, took his inheritance, went to a nearby town, squandered it, went into the pigs, and then upon his lowest moment, in the darkest of darkness, a revelation came to him. He said, "Everything I could have ever wanted, I had in my father's house." And so he came back, and he came back with guilt and shame, and he rightly said, "I am unworthy to be your son." Yeah, you know what the father does? He kills a calf. He provides sacrifice, and he celebrates the son, said, "This son was dead, but now he is alive, and let's celebrate." God, our friends, our God is not actively wanting to smite us. Yes, his wrath is just, but he is a God who has come for our life. It's the thief in John 10 who comes to steal, kill, and destroy in the midst of suffering. But Psalm 90, when it talks about 1,000 years are like a day, 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it's past, or as a watch in the night. This is setting the stage for who our God is like. Because this passage reminds me that our sufferings, even though it might feel long, they're only going to pass away. They will. But it also reminds me of who God is in 2 Peter 3:8-9. Peter writes, "Do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he's patient, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." This is not new. This is the same God of the New Testament in the Old Testament. What characteristics of God is repeated in the Old Testament? Exodus 34:6. You can find Psalm 103, Psalm 145, Jonah 4:2. The Lord is gracious, compassionate, slow. He's slow to anger. So he can't get angry, but he's slow. Rich and abounding in love. And so the hope is we have an everlasting God who, when he made all of creation, he made the mountains, and he declared it good. Yet when he made us, fearfully and wonderfully made, he said it was very good. And his everlasting love for us, the fact that he rejoices with us, that was then, now, and forever. Just like how our everlasting God is both now, then, now, and forever. And so I invite you to put your dwelling place in the Lord and his everlasting love for you. My invitation for my mom, in the midst of her anxiety of whether the surgery will go well or not, is to put her trust in the everlasting God. Again, I come from a health background, but she's someone who, in the midst of her lung cancer, she is now quickly sharing with her friends, her family, stay away from places with high air pollution, work out more, eat well. Yes, I want to encourage those things too. But the most important thing is that she would be like Reepicheep, that her nose would be pointing to the sunrise, and that she would be confident knowing where her dwelling place is. Her dwelling place is not in the Promised Land. It's not in the Niagara Escarpment. It's not in beautiful British Columbia. It's not out east or in your cottage. Your dwelling place is with the everlasting Lord, who is an everlasting love for you, who is for you and not against you. And who can condemn you? Who can bring a charge against you? If God, through Jesus Christ, fully God, fully man, was our substitute, took our glory and shame, but demonstrated his love on the cross for us once and for all. And that's why I'm going to end the sermon with the fact that we need to cling and crave to the cross. Because when we do, we can have a relationship and we can have hope with the everlasting God.